Honestly, I'm just here for more time with Jet Reno. The world does not deserve Tignataro. Hello, interwebs! I hope you're all doing well, and this is basically going to be a Star Trek heavy week on this channel because not only am I going to be reviewing the premiere of Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 2 this week, but I also have a review of the latest Star Trek book release, this time the latest in the Star Trek Discovery line of books, Somewhere to Belong by Dayton Ward. Before we get into the review of this, just to let you all know, I will be giving some light discussion on the story's plot and things like that, but I will not be giving major spoilers for where the story goes and all of that stuff. So if you have not read the book, and in particular if you're thinking about whether or not this is a book that'll interest you, don't worry, I won't spoil anything for you, but I may help pique your interest if you do like this book, because I am going to give this one a really, really positive review, because this is actually something really unique for the Star Trek Discovery line of books, because there have been quite a few Star Trek Discovery books that have come out ever since the series began several years ago. I think there's been like 9 or 10, and I have really liked pretty much all of them. There may have been like 1 or 2 that I did not like, but the thing with all of those Star Trek Discovery novels that we've gotten so far is that they've been kind of having to have this weird place within the Star Trek world, because given the fact that Star Trek Discovery is such a heavy serialized show, most seasons of the series have been kind of taken place back to back to back, and there's not really been any good place for any of the Star Trek Discovery novels to kind of like tell a story in the little gaps between all of the stuff going on in that series, because there's really technically no time. Season 1 sort of ends right where Season 2 picks up, and sort of the same thing with Season 2 into Season 3. And so most of the books that we've been getting for Star Trek Discovery recently have just been like prequel novels or novels about like side characters, and not really about like a story taking place on the USS Discovery with our USS Discovery crew in full, because we haven't really been able to tell any stories with that crew because they've kind of been off doing a bunch of their own stuff within the TV series proper. So what I've loved about this book in particular is it's the first Star Trek Discovery novel that feels like it could have been a one-off episode of the series, because it takes place between seasons 3 and 4, where we do know there's been actually a couple months between those 2 seasons where the crew is just off doing whatever Starfleet crews do. And so it's been really refreshing to finally get a novel that actually gets to see all of our different crew members interacting and reacting to each other, instead of just like one character off in isolation telling a little side story. And even more so, this book kind of delivers something that I've really always wanted Star Trek Discovery to do a little bit more of, which is tell a singular story that has a beginning, middle, and end within the confines of one tale, one sort of, I would say like an episode, but in this case, a singular book. Because with Star Trek Discovery, everything's sort of like go fast, like get moving. Every episode sort of is picking up where the last one left off and has to sort of carry the larger seasons-long plot. Whereas this book feels like it could just have been an episode of the show. Like if I sat down and turned on an episode, it was like an episode of Strange New Worlds, but with the Discovery crew where we had a beginning, middle, and end. This is what this feels like. And I really, really liked that. I wish Discovery would do more of that, but if not, you know, this is kind of the best version of that I can really expect. Because this is just a story that utilizes every member of the crew. They go off and go on a mission, and that's it. By the end of the book, the mission's over, and we kind of get a overall resolution of the emotion and character beats and plot beats that the story wanted to tell. And I really appreciated that for that. The other thing that I also really liked about this book is it does what good tie-in novels do, which is tell the stories that a lot of people wanted to see or sort of like fit into the cracks of the on-screen stuff that we didn't get to see, but we kind of presumed had to have happened, and so we get to see the dots get connected. Like, for example, one of the big emotional arcs in this book that gets picked up on is that at the end of Star Trek Discovery Season 3, we have kind of had that moment where Stamets is angry at Burnham for her sort of sending him away during a critical moment and him feeling that took away his agency. So we have that moment where like Anthony Rapper's like staring daggers at Burnham at the end of Season 3 in the final scene of that season. But then in Season 4, it's kind of water under the bridge. Like Burnham and Stamets have seemingly dealt with him. We don't get to see that like storyline of like him coming over his differences and anger at her. It sort of was a story that the writers didn't want to spend time telling, which is, you know, fine on them. But that allows this book to get into that arc, and I really, really enjoyed that, getting to see Stamets' arc in the story. But that sort of applies to all of the characters. because this book, as it takes place between seasons 3 and 4, there's a bit of downtime for the crew in a way that we don't get in sort of the big storylines, and so we get to see what the crew's like when they're sort of like resting and sort of like getting used to the new 32nd century that they've been finding themselves in a way that feels more like day to day rather than the like, we got to get to the next thing of the next book. And the way that this story tells that is we get a Denobulan counselor character, and love my Denobulans, happen to see some Star Trek Enterprise nonsense up in here, comes on the ship and actually sort of acts as counselor for all of our crew members and helps them sort of navigate sort of assimilating into 32nd century worlds and how they're all handling it. And this creates some interesting conflicts and ways for characters to articulate themselves. I think of Adira specifically being the human character with a Trill symbiote and how they're dealing with, wrestling with so many identities in a way that we didn't get to see a ton of on screen because season 4 mainly more dealt with Adira's relationship to Gray specifically, as opposed to their Trill identity. So getting to see a little bit of that in here was nice too. Culber being the sort of de facto counselor on the show proper, and also has to deal with maybe feeling some jealousy towards this counselor who comes on the ship and feeling like maybe he's seen as less than or not being able to do his job well enough. So I loved all of those aspects of this novel with really just like connecting the dots and getting little character arcs for all of our characters in there. Burnham also, for example, being a fresh new captain and feeling like, do I fit in this captain's chair? Because by the time we get season 4, she's pretty confident in the role. So this book really sort of allows us to see Burnham sort of come into her own a little bit more in a way that we didn't get to see on screen that I really, really enjoyed. On top of that, that's sort of the character arcs going on in the background here. The plot of this novel, I think, is really fascinating, especially if you love some of the unique entries that Discovery has brought to Star Trek. And I'm speaking specifically, and this isn't spoiling too much of the plot, but the storyline of this book deals with the Zahians and Zahian culture in the 32nd century. If you don't remember what the Zahians are, they are the species that, I'm not going to be able to say her name, but Ika Halika Poe, Tilly's friend, the alien friend that we met in the short treks and actually appeared in Star Trek Discovery Season 2.
Your Serene Highness, may Tilly!
And Poe being an instrumental member of helping the Discovery crew go to the 32nd century. So we don't get to see the Zahian culture in the 32nd century on the show, but we got to see them in the 23rd century. So what this book does is sort of pick up that thread and says, what happened to the Zahians in the hundreds of years since then? And so it's really cool that this book is not only using the 32nd century of the Discovery novel and tell a story, but picking up a thread that is uniquely Discovery as well with the Zahians, and sort of having this conversation about what it feels like for the Discovery crew to go back and see a culture that has changed in a way that they didn't get to influence in the hundreds of years since, but may have been influenced by them in the 23rd century through Poe and through Tilly and things like that. And so there's just these really interesting, fascinating threads that get pulled on that sort of tie all of Discovery's disparate parts together in this novel in a really cool way. And even more so, what I liked about this novel is the storyline that gets picked up on the Zahian culture is pure Star Trek stuff, where we have two sides of this alien civilization having understandable conflict with each other, and how that ends up getting played out with the Federation sort of coming in and kind of being like, well, we're going to be a third party and sort of come in here and sort of think about what these sort of different viewpoints mean. And so it's a particular Star Trek story, but gets more conflicted because of this Discovery crew members' ties to the past of this culture, as well as the fact that the Federation hasn't been around, given what we knew with the burn in season 3, and the Federation just starting to get itself going back out into the stars at the end of season 3. So I love this novel because it feels so uniquely Star Trek in sort of its structure, in terms of the stories being told, but it's using the elements that make this a uniquely Star Trek Discovery novel, not just the crew, but the setting and the stories that it can tell in a way that is unique to this novel as well. So I just think that this book is if I had to point to a book that I was like, this is what I want from a Star Trek Discovery novel, and even perhaps more from the Star Trek Discovery show itself to do, this is it. There are a few negatives that I do have for this book. You know, there's a little bit of both sidesing some of the political elements of its main plot that I'd have to spoil to get into some of the nitty gritty. It's not so egregious that I'm like, oh, this is a bad, you know, bad politics or anything, but it's one of those like, I think there could have been a little bit more nuance present there. And then also some of the elements of like just the like queer elements that I'm sort of very responsive to in the book that I don't think the book captured as well. Most specifically, while I think the book captures the characters of Culber, Stamets, and Adira all really well individually, we don't really get a sense of them as like a family unit that we get so clearly on Star Trek Discovery proper. It's not a detriment of the book, but there was no real scenes where we really got to feel the family feel of those characters, even though we got to see them in a bunch of scenes together in the book. The book didn't seem to, for me, really understand that dynamic that I see so clearly in both the writing and performances on the show. That I think was just missed a little bit in this book. Again, not so detrimental that I'm like, this is awful and terrible, or I find it offensive. It's just one of those like, oh, I feel a little bit off here in terms of just what I resonate with, particularly from those characters. But overall, I would give this a very strong rating. I really love this book, and I think I really highly recommend it to anyone who is a Star Trek Discovery fan or just a Star Trek fan generally. So, excellent book, worth your time and worth your read. So that is my thoughts on Star Trek Discovery, Somewhere to Belong. With all that said, don't forget to check out my review of Star Trek Strange New World Season 2 that is coming this week, both of the premiere and my spoiler-free review of the first 6 episodes of the season that I've already gotten to see. But beyond all that, I hope you're all taking care of yourselves, my friends, and I hope you all live long and prosper.